Alright, I got a lot of late videos to do on my plate, so let's get the one you've all been waiting for the longest out of the way. Starting us off at number 10 is the 13th installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as well as a solid capper in the Captain America trilogy, Civil War, followed by the gorgeously constructed stop-motion fantasy epic Kubo and the Two Strings, and the creepy as hell yet fascinatingly complex supernatural thriller from South Korea, The Wailing. My number 7 pick is actually a tie between two of my favorite buddy comedies that took place in the great outdoors, Taika Waititi's hilarious New Zealand adventure Hunt for the Wilder People, and the Daniels' absurdly original and surprisingly layered farting corpse dramedy, Swiss Army Man. Coming in at number 6 is the movie that nobody saw winning the Best Picture Oscar, and no, this isn't a setup for an already outdated punchline, Moonlight, with Park Chan-wook's sexually charged period piece The Handmaiden taking the number 5 spot, and Mike Mills' absorbing coming-of-age tale during the late 1970s, 20th Century Women, resting easily at number 4. Settling in at number 3 is the powerful documentary on the survivors of America's first mass shooting at UT campus, Tower, with number 2 being yet another equally powerful doc, one that clocks in at nearly 8 hours in length and focuses in great immense detail on everything that led to the epic rise and tragic fall of one of the most prolific athletes in history, OJ Made in America, and my number 1 pick for the best film of 2016 should be no surprise to anyone, is Damien Chazelle's musical masterpiece, La La Land. From its mind-blowing opening number to its bittersweet closing moments, this was an overwhelming movie-going experience that just simply hit all the right notes for me. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for, my top 10 best films of 2017.
I know you want to say it.
Number 10. The Shape of Water, the movie that finally earned one of my all-time favorite filmmakers, Guillermo del Toro, back-to-back Oscars for Best Director and Best Picture of the Year. And all it took was a story about a mute janitor falling in love with a fish man, Carter style. If you have ever kept up with del Toro's career or seen him in basic interviews, you'll automatically know just how much he adores the dark fantasy genre, and you could practically feel the same level of love and passion soaking up every frame of this movie. From the incredible production value, the whimsical score, to even the unconventional romance at the center of it all, this feels very much like del Toro picking up the mantle that Tim Burton left behind during his prime and making it entirely his own. It also helps to have an incredible cast ensemble to help bring it to life, like Michael Shannon, Octavia Spencer, Michael Stuhlbarg, and Doug Jones as yet another unforgettable creature in del Toro's roster. But the ones that stood out the most for me were Sally Hawkins as the film's silent protagonist, whose performance pushes you almost to the brink of tears, all without uttering a single word, and Richard Jenkins as her closeted neighbor, whose storyline is just as equally tragic as it is endearing. Ultimately, The Shape of Water comes down to being not just an amazing love letter to del Toro's favorite classic movie monsters, but an ode to the outcast of society who want nothing more than to be seen, heard, and loved. Obviously not my first choice for the Best Picture win, but hey, at least it makes the loss of del Toro's Hellboy 3 sting a lot less. I'll deal with you later. Number 9. 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Out of all the films nominated for last year's Best Picture category, this is the one that probably received the most heated backlash. Of course, I can't entirely say that most of the criticism didn't come unwarranted, especially towards the film's most racial themes, but then again, this is a movie about broken, miserable, and hate-filled people, so the fact that it's alienating towards most moviegoers shouldn't come as any surprise. Personally, I love the fact that this film takes its viewers on such an emotional roller coaster ride that you almost have a difficult time deciding how you should feel about these people. The biggest examples being Frances McDormand and Sam Rockwell's characters, both of whom suffer a tremendous amount of loss, treat almost everyone in their small town like garbage, use extreme methods to achieve their goals, and undergo their own arcs of redemption that'll make you feel conflicted about rooting for or against them in the first place. I also like the fact that the movie doesn't provide any easy answers and lets the audience speculate on what might become of these people, especially during its closing moments. At times it's piss your pants funny, while in others it's shit your pants serious. Three Billboards is a brilliant film with excellent writing, phenomenal performances, and a compelling theme of finding much needed closure within a sea of all-consuming hatred, which is definitely something the world at this moment can learn from right now. Number 8. Get Out. There was quite a number of great horror films that came out in 2017. Some that divided public opinion, others that made a shitload of money, and some that just kept growing stronger and more resonant with each passing viewing, and made a shitload of money. Part of what made this film work so well is how much of it was rooted in the uncomfortable truth that a large majority of black citizens face every day, and the myriad levels of racism that still remain prevalent, even among the most progressive and well-meaning of white individuals. But to be fair, white people are just scary in general. I mean, have you seen what's on Netflix lately? Another reason why this movie works so well is the leading performance by Daniel Kaluuya, who you immediately feel terrified for, especially in situations that instantly go from cringeworthy to nightmarish. It's not every day you'd see a first-time filmmaker delving headfirst into such tricky subject matter with ease, while also supplying some of the most iconic imagery to come out of the horror genre. But Jordan Peele managed to do it all in spades, and if we can expect the same level of quality with his new film coming out, then the temptation to prematurely tout him as the new master of horror would become just a tad bit harder to resist. Number 7. Dunkirk. This was one of the most intense movie-going experiences I've had in 2017. But then again, when you combine the innovative filmmaking style of Christopher Nolan with the life and death struggles of World War II, that kinda goes without saying. By opting out of the traditional narrative structure we normally see in most war films, Nolan practically drops us in the middle of the action, giving us an up-close and personal view of this pivotal point in history, treating the entire event like a ticking time bomb. Whether it be on land, sea, or sky, the tension has already been cranked up to 11 and you are completely immersed. Plus, it helps to have the usual Chris Nolan tropes that most fans have come to love, like his clever usage of time through ingenious film editing, his undying love for crystal clear 70mm IMAX photography, a new mask to cover up Tom Hardy's face with, and of course his bombastic Hans Zimmer scores, designed for the sole purpose of making you sweat buckets and possibly lose all sense of hearing afterwards.
Okay.
And while it doesn't offer a ton of character development, the actors involved each did a great job of selling the material, most notably Kenneth Branagh, Mark Rylance, the aforementioned Tom Hardy, the kid from One Direction, the kid from Bandersnatch, and a surprising voice cameo by Michael Caine.
The size of a tangerine.
In the end, Dunkirk ranks right up there with Nolan's more hopeful outings that showcase the better part of humanity even among such dire and desperate circumstances. I know we got a few more slots to go on this list, but out of all the 2017 Best Picture nominees, this one easily ranks as my top choice. Number 6. Coco. If you saw the Pixar movie ranking at the end of my Incredibles 2 review, then you would already know how much I love this movie. And while it does share a lot of similarities with the other animated movie about Dia de los Muertos, The Book of Life, the movie still managed to defy a lot of preconceived expectations by telling a story that simultaneously felt personal and universal, with a style and tone that helped set itself apart from that other film. It also helps that it's working with much richer material to begin with, like the way each character is designed and written, the gorgeous visual layouts of both the real world and the land of the dead, and its central themes of love, family, and memories that thankfully don't come across as regurgitated lines from the Fast and Furious franchise.
I don't have friends. I got friends.
Shut it, Vin Diesel! I also can't talk about Coco without mentioning the music, which not only ties the whole movie together, but had just as much love and thorough research ingrained into it as the story and animation. When all is said and done, the folks over at Pixar have worked their magic once again, doing what they do best, making mostly original adventures with memorable and relatable characters that reduce children and adults to a puddle of well-earned tears. Whether you're of Mexican descent, familiar enough with the culture, or completely new to it all, Coco is one of the most delightfully stunning family films to ever come out of the House of Mouse and the House of Bouncing Lamp, and one that's most certainly worth remembering. Now, before we move on to the top 5, let's take a quick look at some of my honorable mentions. In alphabetical order, they are Baby Driver, Edgar Wright's hyper-stylized bank heist musical thriller concoction that almost made the list until this scumbag ruined the fun for everybody. Colossal, the Anne Hathaway giant monster movie that I continue to grow more fond of the more I think about it. I, Tonya, the darkly comedic take on one of the biggest scandals to happen in competitive figure skating history. It, a more than welcome update on Stephen King's horror classic. John Wick Chapter 2, a worthy follow-up to the underground world of Keanu Reeves' Baba Yaga character, and one that has me even more hyped for the next chapter. Lady Bird, Greta Gerwig's brilliantly funny semi-autobiographical account of an angsty Catholic school student living her life in Sacramento. Mother, Darren Aronofsky's latest batch of what the f***ery that also happens to be my favorite of the two main Love It or Hate It movies of 2017. And finally, we have the funniest, most playful entry to come out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to date, Thor Ragnarok. Now that we got those out of the way, let us resume the remainder of my top 10 list. Number 5. Logan and War for the Planet of the Apes. I decided to put these two together because of how much both shared a similar melancholic tone and offered a fitting end to their heroes' stories, something that most Hollywood franchises tend to shy away from. They were dark, violent, and more emotionally complex than you'd expect from your average blockbuster. With Logan, it was the culmination of Hugh Jackman playing arguably the most beloved and recognized out of all the X-Men characters after 17 years, as well as their chance to not only showcase the insane amount of carnage his character can inflict, but the psychological traumas that come with it. On top of being a great deconstruction of a superhero film, it's also a pretty great modern-day western, with a small dosage of sci-fi mixed in. Plus, it has incredible action, intense drama, and a great deal of memorable performances, most notably Daphne Keane as Logan's equally badass clone daughter, and Patrick Stewart as the dangerously senile Professor X, who offers just as much tragic nuance as his leading co-star. And with this being Jackman's final outing as the title character, he certainly left behind a lasting legacy. As for War for the Planet of the Apes, they continued to push the boundaries of what motion capture technology can do, supplying us with some of the most jaw-dropping imagery and probably the best Andy Serkis performance since Gollum. Point being, these apes have never looked or felt more real than they have in this movie. It also delved much deeper into the series' mythology that many fans would greatly appreciate, features an epic scope that oddly enough feels biblical at times, and managed to get away with just as much dark material as Logan, even with the PG-13 rating. Then again, I shouldn't act too surprised since this is the same franchise that got away with blowing up the Earth within the confines of a G rating. The 70s were definitely a weird time. Both films took the audience on emotionally draining journeys that resulted in conclusions that were more than satisfying, even at the expense of us sobbing uncontrollably in our seats. The only downside I could find in all this is that now that the company is about to be purchased by the House of Mouse, the time for risky adult ventures like these, I'm afraid, may never happen again. Whether or not this winds up being the case in the long run, I'm glad these movies still exist and that the filmmakers got the chance to give their all in both the best comic book adaptation since The Dark Knight and a trilogy capper on par with some of the greats. Number 4. Molly's Game. There's only a handful of notable screenwriters listed in Hollywood where their clever writing and snappy dialogue are the main reasons why people go out and see their films in the first place. The ones that quickly come to mind are Quentin Tarantino and Aaron Sorkin, the latter of which is the man who makes his directorial debut here. As he's proven with other films based on real events like The Social Network, Moneyball, and Steve Jobs, Sorkin knows how to pick his stories and turn them into even more compelling dramas. The story of Molly Bloom, a former Olympic skier who ran the world's most exclusive high-stakes poker games and found herself on the opposite end of the law, is absolutely fascinating to watch unfold. Even if you happen to be a person like me who's never played or completely understood the game of poker, your eyes and ears are 100% transfixed on everything that's happening on screen. It certainly helps that they got someone with commanding screen presence like Jessica Chastain to play the role, who's probably the most compelling on-screen character out of all the films featured on this list. The way she uses her intelligence, sex appeal, and her natural drive for success to acquire the slimiest of bastards to participate in these shady card games with even slimier celebrity icons, you can't help but root for her every step of the way. Oh, and speaking of slimy bastards, no one played up that role better than Michael Cera, who I was surprised to hear was actually playing a variation of Tobey Maguire. Kinda gives you a whole new perspective on this scene now, doesn't it? Every single actor in this pretty much brought their A game, from Kevin Costner, who delivered probably his most emotionally heartfelt performance to date as Molly's estranged father, to even someone like Idris Elba as Molly's lawyer, who brought just the right amount of passion and energy to the role to keep you fully engrossed, even when his accent starts to slip from time to time. For a movie that runs nearly 2.5 hours, Molly's Game moves at a very smooth pace that I could have easily stayed for another hour or so. From its eye-catching opening scene to its central themes of female empowerment, is just one hell of a time at the movies. Number 3. Your Name. Some of you guys might be quick to call this a 2016 release, and while it is true that it was released in Japan that year, the movie didn't officially come to the US until April of 2017, and therefore I think it qualifies for this particular list. But either way you look at it, this is an absolutely stunning piece of work. For those who missed the boat on this worldwide phenomenon, I'm gonna try and keep it as vague as possible because it's just one of those films that's best seen completely cold. The only thing I can say is that it follows two completely random strangers on opposite ends of Japan who mysteriously wake up in each other's bodies. What first starts off as your typical body swap story quickly transcends into something completely different, and one I definitely didn't see coming. There's elements of romance, high school drama and comedy, plenty of twists and turns, and various forms of fantasy thrown in for good measure. On top of all that, you're following characters you start to grow completely fond of, just as they are of each other, even while living in the other person's shoes. I can't really say that I'm familiar with director Makoto Shinkai's previous work, but I can easily tell you that this is one of the most gorgeous looking animated films I've come across in years. Every frame is filled with so many intricate amount of details and fully ingrained in Japanese culture that even the biggest detractors of anime would have to tip their hats in admiration. It's also great knowing that hand-drawn animation is still being shown on the big screen in this day and age, when everyone else in the business outside of Japan has pretty much abandoned the art form entirely. I keep hearing talks about a live-action remake in the works from 500 Days of Summer and Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 director Mark Webb, and if you weren't already aware, my tolerance over live-action adaptations of notable works of animation has been dissipating a lot lately. But regardless of how it turns out, I really hope it brings more and more people to seek out the original, because it truly is a magnificent gem of a film, animated or otherwise. And if it's got people in Hollywood interested, you know it's gotta be good. Number 2. Brigsby Bear and The Disaster Artist. Okay, I swear this is the last tie on this list. In fact, this was one of the main reasons why this video took so damn long to make, because I couldn't really decide whether or not to include two separate ties in one list. But in the end, I ultimately stuck with my guns and paired up two films I couldn't bear to see left out. And if you don't like it, then
leave your stupid comments in your pocket.
The main reasons why I rank both films so high is because I'm just an absolute sucker for behind-the-scenes stories and the process of movie making. Each film has their own separate weirdo protagonist with aspiring dreams and strange obsessions who go through a bizarre set of circumstances in order to achieve their goals through the ways of cinema and newfound friendships. Despite the differences in tone, with one being a full-blown comedy and the other being, weird, the two films still managed to tap into that primal urge that all artists share, which is to go out and create. The Disaster Artist was my most anticipated film to premiere at South by Southwest, and it's easily the funniest movie about making a movie since Ed Wood, mostly because of the on-screen romantic chemistry between actual brothers James and Dave Franco as the men responsible for arguably the greatest cinematic experience of our lifetime. Their awkward yet infectious interactions with each other are the things that help sell this movie the most, and you like them well enough to want to see them make their dreams come true, even if it results in burning a ton of bridges with nearly all of their fellow cast and crew members. Brigsby Bear, on the other hand, is one of the most unique, lighthearted, and surprising films I've come across throughout the entire duration of 2017. While it's nowhere near as hilarious as Disaster Artist, it was still the only movie I've seen that year that spoke to me on such an emotional level that I found myself full-on ugly crying during various points, which makes it all the more strange knowing this was produced by the same folks behind Dick in a Box and Jizz My Pants. It's a real shame this movie never found an audience during its theatrical run, because there's a lot about the main character that I could easily see people latching onto, whether it be his childlike optimism or his undying love for his Brigsby Bear TV show he grew up on. Watching both movies back to back gave me a huge jolt of inspiration and reminded me a great deal of why I've always wanted to be a filmmaker in the first place. It really comes down to the go for broke mentality and ambition behind both of these films, and the relatively simple idea of grabbing a camera and making a movie with your friends that got them ranked so close to the top for me. So if you're ever in the need of feeling inspired or just want to put something on for a good laugh, look no further than these two films right here. And the number one best film of 2017 still is Blade Runner 2049.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Those are the thoughts that immediately came to my mind after watching this nearly 3-hour sequel, 35 years in the making, to one of the most influential science fiction movies of all time, projected in the IMAX format on opening night. Of course, I'd be lying if I didn't admit that the idea of doing a follow-up film to Blade Runner sounded too grand and ludicrous for anyone to successfully pull off. Even with talented individuals like Denis Villeneuve, Ridley Scott, Ryan Gosling, and Harrison Ford on board, it was difficult to imagine how a sequel of any kind could measure up to the legacy of the original. But as soon as the film started, all of my past worries quickly began to fade away, and I was completely sucked in. Not only did 2049 live up to the hype and defy expectations, not only was it one of the most immersive and invigorating cinematic experiences I've witnessed since Mad Max Fury Road, but it might actually be a better, more fully realized film than the original, something I never would have thought to be within the realm of possibilities. For the most part, the movie tells a pretty self-contained story that never feels like a rehash of what came before, or an extended commercial for the next dozen chapters. It also introduces new concepts and ideas that deepen the lore of this dark, dreary world, all without making the slightest attempt at answering the original film's most burning of questions. It features plenty of endearing new characters, both human and replicant, yet another euphoric score by Hans Zimmer and co-collaborator Benjamin Wallfisch, a beautifully constructed and admittedly awesome three-way love scene that's thankfully less Weinsteinish than the one in the first film, and of course a visually stunning layout so jaw-dropping that it finally got longtime cinematographer Roger Deakins his long-awaited and most deserved Oscar win. Every single person that was involved in this production actually came to work and put an unbelievable amount of effort into handcrafting what is essentially an epic masterpiece that I'm fairly certain nobody saw coming. It's one of the best sequels ever made, it's one of my newfound favorite movies of all time, and it's one of the greatest reminders for why we go to the movies in the first place. If that doesn't sound like best of the year material for you, then I don't know what is. And those were my picks for the best films of 2017 and 2016. So glad to get this off my chest, and I couldn't thank you guys enough for waiting this long. As always, feel free to leave a friendly comment down below and tell us what your favorite movies of 2017 and 2016 were. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to keep up with more videos like this in the near future. But until then, our show is now concluded. I'm the host, and thank you all so very much for your infinite amount of patience. Take care.